The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. And let's connect you with a freshman delegate from Winchester. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Delegate Berg, good to see you.
It's good to be here.
Well, as a freshman, we were talking earlier, there was a lottery to determine seniority of the 14 or 15 new members, and you came out where?
Yes, I drew the highest number. I drew number 100. Since that time, we have had an additional person that was selected, and so I've moved up one seniority step, and that may be also the case when we determine who would finish off one more seat that's not resolved yet.
Well, congratulations. That shows progress on your part.
Yes, that's great.
So tell us a little bit about how you got involved in politics. I know that you are a retired physician, and you were very active in the local political scene in the Winchester area for a number of years.
Yes, I got involved in politics mostly through medicine, the politics of medicine and what was going on there. And I retired several years ago and got more involved in the politics of medicine and branched out into politics of other areas and found out some of the same issues that I was unhappy about with direction of medicine, for example, were affecting other businesses and other groups of people, and just kind of expanded out from there. And
what committee assignments do you have?
Here I'm on the militia, police, and public safety, and also science and technology.
Great. So what kinds of things were you hearing from your constituents before you got elected, and what kinds of things are you hearing since you've been here?
Well, I was hearing a lot of what other people were hearing across the state. Three big issues, I think. Taxes was big issues. Healthcare was a big issue. And some of the liberty issues in the sense of the size of government or intrusiveness of government, I was also hearing. And those are areas that I had already had an interest in, so that made it interesting to campaign.
And who are some of the large employers in the district you represent?
There's a number. There's Rubbermaid, there's Schenck Foods. Winchester and the surrounding area has some distribution centers, federal distribution centers, and quite a number of actually diffuse businesses. And actually Winchester and Frederick County doing fairly well in the economy as far as overall. So, but there's always room for improvement, and that's always an issue with the state government and how we can improve business climate and the economy in general. So that's obviously a big factor.
So did the recession have an adverse impact on your district?
Well, it did. If you look at the statistics over the last several years and you look at the median income, I believe in Frederick County in our area we had lost $2,000 to $3,000 in median income over several years, which makes a significant effect and has a trickle-down effect in other businesses. Takes a while to recover from that loss of income that people have into their households. And from what I've been hearing, that's recovering somewhat, but it's a little delay in showing some of those figures on overall state figures, for example, of improvement.
And what about the quality of education, especially at the local level, K through 12?
I think Winchester and Frederick County have very good schools. We have a new school in Millwood a few years ago, and I think we have very good teachers, and we have a new Dr. Savine, the superintendent of schools. And I think there's always room for improvement, and that's always an issue, too, with state government. It's one of the big drivers of the budget, along with health care. Those two probably are the biggest drivers of appropriations or budget issues. And there's always room for improvement, but Frederick County and Winchester are doing fairly well, I think.
And of course, one of the issues before the General Assembly this year relates to the standards of learning and the need in some people's minds to reform them. Or are you hearing much about that issue back
Yes,
home?
I am, and that came up during campaign too, when I would be talking at the doors, and I wouldn't know I was talking to a teacher, but they would offer an opinion on that, or other people would offer an opinion because they have students there. And the teachers don't want to necessarily teach to rigid standards. They want a little bit more autonomy, was what I was hearing. And that's true in a lot of businesses, and that was true in medicine, where there's a feeling that there's not the kind of autonomy that you want to practice the best you can, to teach the best you can. And so that is an issue here in the General Assembly that we're addressing too.
And I guess the concern is that, as you say, some teachers now are teaching to the test.
Yes.
The tests basically are multiple choice, and they require a lot of memorization versus critical analysis.
That's true. Teachers want to be able to, do what they can to help their class the most. And the teachers right in the classroom know how to handle those students best. It's hard to say that you can come up with a better solution that would fit everybody across the state than to allow a little more autonomy in the schools.
And of course, the number of tests themselves is an issue. I think between first and high school, there are like 34 tests, and that's in addition to other tests that these students have to take.
Yes, that's true. Someone pointed out that a constituent of mine, that when he was younger, they had quite a bit of tests also. But the issue is, if you're going to teach to those tests and you can't do other things that may be more worthwhile in your mind with your students and help your students, then it does become a problem. In addition, the SOLs would be somewhat have a reflection on teachers, and sometimes a little bit unfairly, because they may have made good progress with a class or with certain students, but the students may still be behind and test behind, and it somewhat would reflect on the teachers that their students weren't up to par, when in fact that teacher may have done very well in improving that class.
Right. Are you hearing anything at all about legislation that was passed last year that now allows the state to take over a school if it doesn't meet certain standards?
I'm not familiar with any specific legislation, but there is, I was just informed in this last week about some money that was appropriated to help a couple schools in the state that are having problems. So that's being addressed. There are a few schools that are a real problem.
Annually, there's another issue that comes up. It's based upon what's called the King's Dominion Law, which does not allow a school district to begin the school year until after Labor Day. Now, there are a ton of exceptions to that under the law, but every year there's a move to get rid of that to allow the school districts more discretion and autonomy.
Yes. So, in my politics in the past, I had read about that, and that was always an issue. I'm not aware of any specific bill in this general legislature, only because I'm not on education committee, and if it hasn't passed out of subcommittee, for example, I very well may not have looked at it, considering the number of bills there, and some of them won't pass out of subcommittee. But when they do, that would be an issue that I'd be interested in. Other interesting areas in education would be funding for other mechanisms of education, like school choice, homeschooling, and there are a couple bills there that have already come out of some committee or been addressed. In fact, my fellow freshman from Frederick County and Loudoun County, Delegate Clarke, has a bill that would help fund some of the homeschooling or alternate schools.
And I think he also has a bill, or he's interested in the subject of ensuring that children who are homeschooled have the ability to participate in athletics, for example.
Yeah, the TBO bill of Delegate Rob Bell passed out of subcommittee, and yes, that's an issue.
There was a freshman orientation, I believe, for new delegates. Can you describe the process and what you learned during that time?
Yeah, we've had a couple of orientations, and the leadership and the clerk's office here does an excellent job. I was impressed with the amount of help you get, the systems that they have for you to get information, get you oriented, and in fact the systems they have in place to keep up with bills, track your bills, keep information straight is actually very good. It was an eye-opener in a sense, seeing the vast amount of things that are done and seeing actually how smoothly they run here. So I was impressed.
Now, we talked a little bit earlier off camera about the number of physicians in the General Assembly, and I think there are 4 on the House side. There was one of the senators, Ralph Northam, who's now the lieutenant governor. How does your background and training help you here, you think?
Well, I think it's beneficial in a sense somewhat because of the nature of who I am and the way I practiced. A one-on-one situation, you get a good feel when you're talking to patients, what affects them directly, how they feel, how the individual feels. And in medicine, you had issues of health. You had issues of privacy. You had issues of cost. So a lot of the things that are very important things to people, you've run across in your practice if you've had some kind of primary practice, particularly where you had that daily contact with people. So you get to understand what people are concerned about. And that actually is what I think is the most important thing that I've got out of that, and that's going to help me in the General Assembly, is keeping the individual the focus, the individuals and the families, because that's really what's important.
The state of Virginia continues to enjoy a AAA bond rating.
Yes.
Forbes listed it as the #1 state to do business in. How do we continue to maintain that environment in order to attract and maintain new businesses?
Well, that's a very good question. And I was just at an appropriations update for freshmen to help bring freshmen up to speed. And appropriations and budget is, very involved. And it was an excellent presentation, a couple hours. And Delegate Chris Jones spoke to that particularly. And the leadership and the people in appropriations are very aware of the need to balance spending with the revenue. Of course, we have a balanced budget amendment. We have to balance the budget. But they are very attuned to spending issues. And I think this has been going on for quite a while. Delegate Chris Jones has been in there for quite a while. And I see success looking back, and I think we'll continue along that way. So I anticipate we'll still do well as far as relation to other states.
And of course, education is the foundation. We have to educate our younger politicians to take the jobs of the future, so to speak. And our community colleges play a critical role in that too, do they not?
Yes, they do. There's also technology and other education that is becoming a little bit more focused for people that don't want to go on to college but need some technical degrees or technical skills. And there are some very good jobs out there, in fact, that the state is clamoring for more people for. And sometimes we're getting people from out of state, or we don't have quite enough education sources to develop those kind of people and those skills. And that's being looked at, and I think that's very important. Some of those jobs are very good jobs that you don't require college.
So more of a focus on vocational education, for example, for high school students who may not want to continue education beyond that, but who certainly want to follow a disciplined trade that they can make a good living at.
Yes, and they could do that. Yes.
Now, what junior colleges are in your district, if any?
There is Shenandoah University is right in Winchester, and we have Lord Fairfax Community College right down the road in Middletown, just several miles down.
And they have played a really good role, not only in terms of educating youngsters, but also transitioning a number of adults who unfortunately lost their jobs during the recession into some other employment venue.
Yes. I'm not really fully up to date on everything that they do.
Right.
But Shenandoah University and Lord Fairfax Community College are very active, very vibrant colleges, and they do play a big part.
And of course, our universities are well known, not only throughout the Commonwealth, but also throughout the nation and the world. How do we ensure that we maintain the balance between out-of-state residents who help to subsidize some of the costs there, and the necessity to ensure that students, residents here, get into those universities?
Well, that's a very good question, and that's been an issue for a few years, and that's an issue in the House of Delegates this year, too, in the General Assembly. I don't have backgrounds on both sides, but I do know that there's this effort to make sure, in fact, that we do make those positions available enough for the state residents. That's been the feeling in the past in general, that we are not quite providing the opportunities, the ease of opportunity that we really should for our own students in the Commonwealth, and I think that is being addressed.
Great, great. Now let's turn to another issue relating to transportation. That's a big issue throughout the Commonwealth. I don't know to what extent it's a huge issue in your district, but do you hear from your constituents about the needs of transportation locally?
Yes, you always hear about certain roads that need repairs, or certain things that constituents would want done. For example, we have Route 37 bypass on the east that's been in the works for decades, and it's a slow process. It requires some changes in I-81 exchanges, for example, and movements of roads, and by the time those things start, people don't necessarily have a good idea where it's going. It's a slow process, and there's always these concerns about this traffic, or putting the money there, or speeding up this bypass, getting it done quicker, and that is a VDOT issue, and there's relatively little you can do on those major programs to address the constituents' immediate concerns. On the other hand, there's the issues with local roads, and requirements for local roads could be addressed, for example, in the state legislature, so that it makes it easier with certain developments to put in certain kind of roads, not quite so specified. In other words, a little more leeway for the county to do what's best for the county. And that's something I would be interested in looking at, because there's a delay when you're trying to get anything done on a county level when you have to go to the VDOT. And there's a lot of regulations that, in a sense, may not be that applicable to where you are in your county, in that rural area. And that may be worthwhile looking at.
Now, to what extent was the transportation funding bill that passed last year an issue in your campaign?
It wasn't as big an issue in my area, because we don't have, it didn't address specific things to Winchester, Frederick County, we being more rural. In Loudoun County, of course, you got the rail, and you've got a lot more road systems, and the impact there on that transportation bill was going to be much greater there. What I was hearing with the transportation bill is people wanted the money that was going to be spent well. In other words, it didn't have an impact on the roads directly as much in the Frederick County, but it had an effect on the pocketbook. And there were issues with transportation that people didn't feel were necessarily worthwhile. Some people, constituents, had mentioned they didn't feel we ought to be putting a lot of money into rail in Loudoun necessarily. It's not something that they feel should be as much of a state government issue. They feel more that you should stick to roads and things like that. Right. And it's a tough issue.
Just like any other major piece of legislation, there are unintended consequences. Yes. There are things people don't like. And apparently this year there's a move to repeal one of the tax provisions dealing with the use of hybrid vehicles.
Yes.
I don't know whether you have many constituents who drive hybrid vehicles, or whether you've even heard much about that issue, but where do you understand that issue stands?
I have heard a lot about it.
Oh, you have?
You'd be surprised. We got quite a bit of emails on that, and the bill has already come up in the House of Delegates. And my feeling on that is that hybrid tax is not appropriate. In a sense, the hybrid vehicles are still using roads, and they should pay some, people would say, for the use of those roads and the upkeep of those roads. But in fact, a gas hybrid is still buying gasoline. And there are some gas hybrids, any number of them, that are getting less mileage than a smaller, straight gasoline engine. So they are still paying. And I do agree with the argument that you encourage people to buy hybrids for the economy and to save gas. In a sense, then when they do that, you come back and you kind of, slap them on the face and say, right, well, we're going to have to tax you here because you're doing a good job in this other area that we were trying to drive you to. So I don't think at this point we ought to be taxing those people who bought those vehicles. Plus, in a sense, they made that decision based on what they knew at the time. So you're going back and penalizing these people for a decision that they made for a very good reason.
Right. Now, what about job creation? You talked earlier about, in a different context, about rules and regulations that impede creativity. Some people say that the same thing exists for small business people and entrepreneurs who want to start a new business. What do you think needs to be done in terms of easing regulations?
That is one of the issues that actually, as I alluded to earlier, got me into politics when I was looking at regulations in medicine, and then I branched out and I was looking at regulations in other businesses, and I talked to people in our Republican committee, people that are businessmen, and it is an issue. I don't think the government can just take a pen and create jobs per se. There has to be a market somewhere, whether it's in the state or you were going to export to other states or elsewhere. There has to be a market for a product, but the government, and this is federal government, local government, state government, needs to make it as easy for the entrepreneurs, for the businessmen, to either start those businesses, expand those businesses, or make money on those businesses, or they won't be able to stay in business. And there are a number of regulations that could be eased, I would think, that would make that easier. And then, of course, along the same lines, when you're talking about business expansion, there's the area that's tied in, and that's taxes. That's very complicated because then you start talking about the budget on the state and not just job creation. But you have to look at the tax situation. One of the reasons I moved here more than a decade ago from New York was to set up my medical practice. I did not want to set that up in New York. And people move for those kind of reasons. They move for the economy. They move because it's a good area to raise a family. They move for education. And we're good in those areas, and we need to stay that way.
Some people say that's voting with your feet, I think.
It is.
Now, we have a number of military installations in the Commonwealth. We have a lot of returning veterans who have served this country. What about assisting them in terms of entrepreneurship and starting new businesses?
I think what we can do, the state should do in that area is worthwhile if they can help assist veterans that have been coming back. Especially some of these veterans have skills that just need to be brushed up, or they need to be made aware of some areas where they can get in with the skills that they have, and perhaps make some incentives for businesses to take a look at the returning military people. They have a lot of skills, a lot of these military vets, and should be able to get good jobs.
Now, what about the heavy reliance in the Commonwealth on the federal government? We've got all these military installations. We have agencies of government. We have a lot of people who work in Washington, D.C. Isn't it necessary that we start to wean our way away from that and diversify the economy?
Well, that is an issue because of the sequester and the talk about funding for military. There's two areas in Virginia that are affected, two situations, and one is more with the military personnel, and that's a little less affected under the federal budget that way. Then there's the other issues of naval yards at Norfolk, or even in Northern Virginia, where there's a lot of defense-related spending, in a sense, in Virginia, and that's a little more affected by the federal government's funding of the military. And it does need to be looked at. We don't want to be dependent too much on federal government dollars, I would think, because we don't have a say over if those dollars are going to come to us that well.
I want to give you an opportunity in our remaining minutes. We've got about 4 minutes left to talk about some legislation that you are pursuing. So let's first talk about something around health care. I know you have a bill that would limit cost.
Yes. Well, I'm not a proponent of the Medicaid expansion, and I'm not a proponent of the Affordable Care Act. This was one of the issues I heard a lot when I was campaigning, and partly because I had a physician background. I think people liked discussing it with me. And I had read the the PPACA.
All 1,600 pages of it?
2,700 pages.
Oh, 2,700.
And so I was very familiar with it. I have put in a bill to make sure that if we do plan management functions, which are some of the functions for certifying health plans and making sure health insurers are following the rules set down by ACA, that we get federal funding for that, and we are not on the hook. That is, Virginia is not on the hook for paying for that cost. It's not mandated that we do that. The federal government has stepped in and done the federal exchange in Virginia,
right,
because we did not do the state exchange. We are not mandated otherwise to do these plan management functions, but we have offered to do it. I feel, though, that we should make sure we get full federal funding for that and not put that extra burden on the Commonwealth of Virginia. And that burden, that cost is going to grow over the next several years for sure, and that could be a significant financial problem in the future.
And of course, we have the Medicaid Innovation Reform Commission that's
yes,
studying the question of Medicaid expansion. I think its charter runs through 2016. Of course, the new governor says, pass a bill now to give me the authority to,
yes,
to make that decision.
Yeah.
Where do you think that's going?
I don't think that's going to be going anywhere. These things take time. You have to do a good job. We don't want to rush in and do something that a couple years later we're going to regret. And if you look around the country, some of the states that have set up state exchanges are having problems and regretting that. Some of them that are doing some of the same things as Virginia, working with the federal government, are having difficulties. And even if they're able to solve those, it's oftentimes significantly more costly than they thought. So we have to be very careful and take our time, make sure we are making sure we are doing the correct thing, and it's not going to be a significant burden in the future.
I know there's another piece of legislation you wanted to discuss, and that involves the ability of an individual who has a concealed carry permit to carry a weapon into an airport, for example.
Yes, before 2004, I think it was, this was allowed. There was as you know, recent shooting of a TSA agent in California. And in fact, that highlights the fact that that area of the airport that this bill addresses is not a secure area. If you just go in to pick up a rental car or to pick up the bags for your mother in the terminal area, that is not a secure area. You are at risk there as you would be in any other public area. And I feel that people ought to be able to protect themselves. It's a fundamental right to protect yourself. And I think being able to carry a concealed weapon there is important as any other situation or area where you would have a life-threatening situation potentially.
Well, Delegate Mark Berg, thank you so much for being with us today. Good luck in your first session.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.